I had a full schedule of preaching and teaching. With lockdown, my diary emptied. Much to my surprise, requests came to preach and teach online, and I've been doing this now in more than 200 locations on 6 continents, at church services, in seminaries and Bible schools, as well as with mission groups and individuals unable to leave home. And I'm so thankful to God for these open doors when other doors are closed. But I'm particularly delighted to be joining you today at the Welcome Church. I prayed for you over many years. Well, now, if you have a Bible handy, may I invite you to turn to the book of Joshua and to the 14th chapter. Jackson Browne wrote Life's Little Instruction Book for his son beginning student life. It's a guidebook as practical as an umbrella. An example, never resist a generous impulse. The book spawned lots of others. Some were humorous insights. A 7-year-old wrote, "I've learned that you can't hide a piece of broccoli in a glass of milk. The voice of experience speaks." Some lessons were much more serious. "I've learned that you can do something in an instant that will give you a heartache for a lifetime." Well, I want you to meet an 85-year-old man who had a good handle on life. Caleb's story appears in a few Bible passages, but our focus will be Joshua 14 verses 9 to 13. We can title his life, How to Thrive Aged 85, but it applies to any age. Although old age is when you've got it all together, you just can't remember where you put it. Our society worships youth, not age. But how about this as an instruction from Leviticus 19:32? "Rise in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God." A man in his 50s was standing on a crowded airport bus. A gorgeous young woman sitting nearby made eye contact and smiled. He's thinking, well, I may be middle-aged, but I've still got it. And then she spoke, "Sir, would you like my seat?" Which rather deflated him. The Bible is pro-aging. Listen to Leviticus 27. "If anyone makes a special vow to dedicate a person to the Lord by giving equivalent value, let the amount be set of a male between the ages of 20 and 60 at 50 shekels of silver. If it is a person 60 years or more, set the value at 15 shekels. So do you see it? The idea of a senior discount comes directly from the Bible. Well, now let's read about Caleb in Joshua 14, and we'll pick it up in the 9th verse. Caleb is reminded Joshua that when he was 40 years old, Moses asked 12 men to explore the promised land, and Joshua and he were included. Only Joshua and Caleb returned a positive report, and the people didn't listen to them, but listened to the fearful report of the other 10. Caleb was following the Lord wholeheartedly. "So on that day Moses swore to me, 'The land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly.' Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me will drive them out, just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. A pastor displayed a Christmas crib for carol services. After the celebrations, the doll representing Jesus went missing. Looking around the streets, he found a boy riding a new bike with the Jesus doll propped on the handlebars. He said, "Why did you steal the Jesus doll?" And the boy said, "But I didn't. I asked God for a red bike at Christmas and said if I got it, I'd give his son a ride, and that's what I'm doing." Well, benefits come our way, and we can forget the God who enabled the blessings. Caleb never did. And he serves as a really good example of some important spiritual qualities. Do you know how the purpose of Jesus coming to earth that first time is summed up in John's Gospel? I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I love the Swedish translation of that you may have life and more than you need. That's meant to be Christianity. But we don't always live the Christian life as fully as we should. There are 3 things Caleb did, and so he lived life above the mediocre. And if we grasp this for ourselves, it will free us to live life to the full and make the most of the rest of our life. First, receive God's promises. Look at Caleb's example. Life didn't start out too promising. Caleb wasn't a Jew. That wouldn't help. He was the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, and they were not part of the Hebrew nation. Caleb was a foreigner. We don't know how he came to be enslaved in Egypt, but maybe we have a clue in his name. Caleb means dog. Now, would you call your son or daughter dog? And to call someone a dog back then was a great insult. He may have been an unwanted child. That's bad, right? Yes, but it can be the best thing to happen depending upon what we make of it. When we're left alone, we can learn to depend on God. Caleb learned to use the scorn of others as a tool to grow stickability to God's promises. Moses promised property 45 years earlier. Since that promise, he spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness with a bunch of unfaithful, grumbling people. Then under Joshua's leadership, Caleb spent the past 5 years fighting as a soldier. And remembering God's promise, he says, "Now give me this hill country." He never let go of that promise. Look, when God gives a promise, never release it. Receive it. Has God given us a promise? No. He has given 7,457 promises. Now, I know some were to individuals, but that doesn't rule most of them out. Just before World War II in the town of Itasca, Texas, a school fire took the lives of 263 children. When the war ended, the town built a new school featuring what was called the finest sprinkler system in the world. 7 years later, in adding a new school wing, it was discovered that the sprinkler system had never been connected. I think that's a parable of what happens to many Christians. There is the person and power of Christ available in us. But so many never hook up, and our lives are spiritually mediocre. Once we find a promise to us from God, receive it, apply it, even if we must wait 45 years for it to be fulfilled. By the way, if you're looking for a promise from God to start this week with, I will give you one to hook up to that means a lot to me. In fact, it means a lot to thousands and thousands of people. The popular YouVersion Bible app is installed on 600 million devices worldwide. And they have reported that Isaiah 41:10 was the most searched, read and bookmarked verse in 2020. It goes like this. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. That tells us that we need reassurance. Now, fear is a legitimate emotion. If we're crossing the road and a vehicle is coming at us, well, fear is expected. It's legitimate to be wary about COVID-19. It's no surprise that this verse is popular. However, it's important to see what it doesn't say. You see, it doesn't say, do not fear because the issues aren't as fearful as you think. It's saying the opposite. The verse begins, so do not fear. People had good reason to be fearful. The world was in turmoil. God's promise was, do not fear, for I am with you. And that's our security, not in God taking us out of a situation. Our prayers are usually about our circumstances. God's answer is usually about himself. Yes, these are difficult days. But blue skies or storm cloud days, God's promise is, I am in it. I am your God. What about the rest of the month, starting each day affirming this promise? Every morning recite or paraphrase it. I am is with me, not I was, but I am is with me. Will we reckon on it? It could change us. That's the kind of positive attitude we need. And by the way, if we have a negative attitude when we are 40, there is a good chance we will not have a negative attitude when we are 85. Do you know why? Because there's a good chance we won't be 85. Optimistic people have better health habits, better immune systems, and likely to live 10 years longer than people with negative attitudes. Caleb teaches us to never give up on God or his promises. 85 is an age when most people feel, well, it's time to slow down. So this brings us to another great quality in life to make the most of our lives. Renew our service. And spelled out in terms of what not to do, never retire from God's service. Now, retirement from a career may be a good idea. You've earned it. Now go and spend your children's inheritance. Although the trouble with retirement is you never get a day off. 6 times the Old Testament describes Caleb saying he wholeheartedly followed the Lord. And if we aren't following God with our whole heart, we're only half-hearted Christians, and half-hearted Christians are faint-hearted Christians. How about this for a song? Some to Jesus I surrender. Some to thee I freely give. I will mostly love and trust him, in his presence often live. I surrender some. Don't you think this song reflects too many churchgoers today? More importantly, does it reflect us? A century ago, Judson van Deventer wrestled with his life choices. He loved the arts and became an author, a composer, an artist. But he felt that God was calling him to ministry. He said, "The pivotal hour of my life came, and I surrendered all." And he penned these famous words, "All to Jesus I surrender, all to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust him, in his presence daily live. I surrender all." Later, he joined Florida Bible Institute and helped mentor one of the greatest evangelists of all time, Billy Graham. Total surrender to God is an essential factor in our relationship with him. Following God with all our heart. And we never retire from spiritual service. The word vocation comes from the Latin to call. And God has called all his children to serve him. It's our vocation. And we can't take a vacation from our vocation. God isn't through with us, whatever our age. There are probably plenty of jobs in our church to tackle. So keep serving, keep praying, keep available to God. I will never retire from serving God. I will never stop preaching the gospel. If I have breath in my body and open doors to do it. If I have teeth, I'm going to chew on the devil. Even when I lose my teeth, I'm going to gum him to distraction. May God give us the endurance that Caleb had at aged 85. Do you know this? Out of the 2,930 individuals that we have in our Bible, we only know the details of the lives of about 100. And only 1/3 finished well. Of the 2/3 that didn't finish well, most failed in the second half of their lives. Caleb is one of the minority who finished well. I hope this doesn't sound too dramatic, but I pray about my own death. I got the idea years ago when I was teaching at a Bible school in Switzerland, and I went into a small museum about the life of John Calvin there in Geneva. And I saw an artist's impression of him dying publicly, pleading with people to go out with the gospel. He was dying well. And ever since then, usually at the turn of the year, I make this my prayer. Father, I don't know whether I will die this year, but if I do, I want to go well. Don't we all? And it happens as we become spiritual Calebs. There are all kinds of stories about spiritual Calebs. I'll tell you one. Evelyn Brand was born in England in 1879 and grew up in a wealthy family. She was converted to Christ, married, and went with her husband as missionaries in a mountain range in India. After 10 years, her husband died at the age of 44. She came home beaten down by grief. After a year's restoration and against advice, she returned all by herself to India, nursing the sick, rearing orphans, clearing jungle land, pulling teeth, establishing schools, spreading the gospel. Age 67, she fell and broke her hip. Her son, Paul Brand, a surgeon, encouraged her to retire. Do you know what she said? "If I leave, who will help the village people? Who will treat their wounds and pull their teeth and teach them about Jesus? When someone comes to take my place, then and only then will I retire." Are we getting older? Of course we are. In fact, we're all a few minutes older than when I began talking. Actually, this is the oldest I've been. Just keep looking for ways to serve Christ. Don't hang on to a job when it's time to make way for someone else, but keep serving our Lord. But a third key quality we learn from Caleb is resist our enemies. Caleb was a brave soldier at 40 and just as courageous at 85. And following the Lord with our whole heart, we will never back up, shut up, or give up until we're caught up to heaven. The Israelites had to conquer their grasshopper complex. You see, 45 years earlier, Moses sent 12 spies into the promised land to investigate. And you remember 10 reported giants in Canaan? Numbers 13:33. We saw the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. 10 spies suffered from a grasshopper complex. Do you know what? They were half right. They did look like grasshoppers in their own eyes. But to the Canaanites, they didn't look like grasshoppers, but a mighty army. According to Rahab, the prostitute who became a princess among the Jews, the people had been trembling in fear of the Israelites for 40 years. We may be suffering from a grasshopper complex, thinking we're too little or too insignificant to really matter to God. If we hear you can't do it enough, we may begin to believe it. So, before claiming God's promises and living in the land of victory, we must overcome the grasshopper complex. We must have Caleb's attitude. He didn't deny there were giants. Instead, he said that these giants would be bread for us. They would have them for lunch. 10 spies were whining, "Look how big those giants are compared to us." And Caleb said, "Look how small those giants are compared to God." God removed 603,548 men of Israel during their wilderness wanderings in the desert because they refused to mix God's promises with faith. Caleb and Joshua were different. And now Caleb says, "Here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go to battle now as I was then. Now, give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day." Question: what's the toughest battle to win against an enemy? On flat ground or against an enemy in fortified cities up in the hill country? Hill country every time, right? Hill country is the toughest. Caleb asked for the hardest challenge. Interestingly, researchers on aging have found challenges are required to keep our brain healthy. God has wired us so that our bodies and minds require challenges, and most of the giants we face are ones we create in our own life, in our own thinking. When it comes to spiritual victory, the old comic strip character Pogo was right. We have met the enemy, and he is us. I agree. Do you know the person in the church that I have more trouble with than anybody else? It's my wife's first husband. That guy really bugs me. Just to make this clear, my wife has only been married once. I am her first husband. And when we follow the Lord with our whole heart like Caleb, we will be willing to face any giant. Facing troubles in Borneo in 1964, the Nepalese soldiers called Gurkhas were known for their valour. The British command asked a squad of Gurkhas if they would be willing to jump out of an aeroplane into combat against the enemy. Well, after discussing it for a moment, the Gurkha sergeant replied, "Yes, we will jump out if the aeroplane will fly as slow as possible, only 100 feet above a swamp." The British commander said, "But that's too low. Your parachutes wouldn't have time to open." And the Gurkha sergeant said, "Oh, you didn't mention parachutes." Now that's courage. Willing to jump out of an aeroplane without parachutes. And the secret for us, with our battles, with our giants, is utilising the strength of the Lord. Paul wrote, "Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armour of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes." In our own strength, we are as helpless as a newborn kitten. But we're not in our own strength, are we? Depending on God's strength, we have all the power of the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Secular books and training courses abound on building up our self-confidence. The King and I musical advises, "Whenever I feel afraid, I hold my head erect and whistle a happy tune, so no one will suspect I'm afraid." But as the lyrics go on to say, the result of this deception is very strange to tell. For when I fool the people, I fear I fool myself as well. It's far better getting before God, remembering the word impossible is not part of God's vocabulary. It is impossible in our strength, but claim this promise: I can do everything through him who gives me strength. So, let's take to heart these lessons from Caleb, shall we? Don't we want to get into the abundant life Christ makes possible? No one can go back and make a brand new start, but we can have a brand new future. Receive God's promises, renew our service, resist our enemies, never retreat from our enemies. My God provides. I will not give in, give up, or back down. Enough. Anxiety has taken away too many sleeping hours and too much laughter. My God reigns, and I take my cues from him. Following God wholeheartedly and depending on his strength, I can't, he can. We will thrive aged 85 or whatever age we are. If God can do that for an old man, just think what he can do with us. About Evelyn Brand, I'll finish the story. She spent 20 years of widowhood in India. When 70 years old, she gets word from the mission office in England they are not going to give her another 5-year term. She is getting too old. She had a party celebrating her time in India. Everybody cheered and said, "Have a good trip back home." She said, "I'm staying in India." And she rode from village to village on horseback to tell people about Jesus for 5 years on her own. One day she fell off and broke her hip. She is 75 years old. Her son says, "Mum, God used you. It's time to go back home." She said, "I'm not going." She spent another 18 years travelling from one village to another on horseback. Falls, concussions. She's 93 years old and can't ride horseback now. And for 2 years, the men in those villages carried her on a stretcher from one village to another. God, I want to be wholehearted for you. That's finishing well. It might be a story that gets told. It may not. Nobody may know about it but you and God. It doesn't matter. God, we want to have this hill country and let people see that Jesus is everything and that Jesus is enough. That's making the most of the rest of our life. And it doesn't stop at the grave but goes on for eternity. That's who God made us to be. And I'm not going to spend my life. I'm going to invest it in what will outlast it. How about you? And then we will be too blessed to be stressed.